You've automated a workflow with Microsoft 365, only to hit a wall with constant permission requests, broken background jobs, and security warnings. Why do custom app integrations feel so much riskier than they should? Today, I'm breaking down the hidden security traps of delegated permissions and the smarter path almost nobody talks about, app-only permissions in Microsoft Graph. If you want safer, smoother Microsoft 365 integrations that just work, stick around. We'll tackle exactly where most setups go wrong, and I'll show you the step-by-step fix that unlocks seamless, secure automation. Why delegated permissions break your automation? If you've ever found yourself wondering why your Microsoft 365 automations stall out at the worst possible time, you aren't alone. Maybe it's late at night. You've set up Power Automate to sync files for accounting and you think you're set, but 2 hours later, that job throws a please login prompt or just quietly dies while nobody's watching. The reason? Most custom apps and automations start with delegated permissions because honestly, it feels like the quickest way to get something working. Use a user's credentials, check a box, and your app instantly inherits whatever that person can do. For a new project, that approach is often tempting. It's practically encouraged by the UI when setting up flows, bots, or even one-off scripts. But there's a catch that comes back to bite every single admin who tries to scale this model. Delegated permissions tie your automation to an actual human user. Under the hood, every API call is piggybacking on a real person's permissions and session. That means anytime the user logs out, gets a new password, or leaves the company, your critical workflow grinds to a halt. The job doesn't just hit pause, it fails, sometimes loudly with an error, sometimes in silence until someone starts asking about missing reports. Wake-up calls usually come early. One morning you discover that automated file upload you tested for weeks suddenly failed at 2 a.m. Support tickets pile up. The logs just show authentication failed, or sometimes nothing at all because a session silently expired. It's not just about the inconvenience either. There's research showing that 70% of custom Microsoft 365 app support tickets boil down to issues with authentication and token handling, not the logic of the app itself. Most of those relate directly back to delegated permissions. Session timeouts, invalid tokens, or missing MFA steps. It sneaks up on you in other ways too. Delegated permissions are persistent headaches when users change roles or go out on leave. Your payroll bot or HR automation relying on an account tied to a real person is an accident waiting to happen. Even if you assign a special service account, someone's going to forget the password expiration or not realize the license is about to be removed. Internal audits end up flagging flows and bots that haven't run in weeks because nobody even checked that a password needed updating. What's worse is that the path of least resistance encourages risky shortcuts. Maybe your workflow needs to touch resources across SharePoint, Exchange, and Teams. You keep adding permissions to make things work, a little more mailbox access here, site collection access there, until suddenly the user tied to that process has more admin rights than your own IT staff. For the sake of reliable automation, teams sometimes grant global admin status to these accounts, not because it's smart, but because delegated permissions force your hand when automation becomes business critical. That transfer of privilege isn't theoretical. There are plenty of real-world stories about bots accidentally gaining far too much access because delegated accounts kept hitting permission errors. The cracks keep adding up. Let's say you run a monthly reconciliation process for finance. Every month, the Power Automate flow slows down, or worse, fails outright. Why? It depends on a single delegated account that loses its session, has its password changed, or gets flagged by security. Then a Teams notification pings your admin on a Sunday morning, or a finance report doesn't get delivered. Fixing these issues isn't just tedious, it chips away at your confidence in automation altogether. Suddenly you have to ask yourself, is the time you saved with automation just spent troubleshooting all the new failure points? It gets messier as your organization grows. Scheduled SharePoint syncs, background tasks for compliance archiving, automated chatbots serving HR questions at odd hours. All of them end up teetering on the stability of whichever user account is backing the permissions. Unlike true service principles, users get deprovisioned, their accounts age out, sometimes they leave, and IT is left picking up the pieces. When everything is built on a stack of delegated permissions, small changes in personnel or security policy ripple out and break things you didn't even realize depended on that one login. On top of the technical pain, there's always an uncomfortable conversation with security. If you're giving broad delegated rights just to make it work, You're setting up a situation where a breach in that single user account compromises not just their inbox, but anything your automated job can touch. In some cases, the entire directory. Mistakes compound. If you've got critical reports or financial automations tripping over password resets or license removals, your stakeholders start to ask if automation is worth the risk at all. The frustrating part is that none of this is particularly rare or new. In practice, a massive percentage of custom Microsoft 365 automations fail or stall because delegated permissions seemed easy at first, but break down in anything resembling a real-world scenario. A single user's password prompt shouldn't be enough to stop payroll from running or compliance jobs from archiving emails. Yet, that's often exactly what happens. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and the more ambitious your automation, the more these issues cost you both in time and in security risks. So, if delegated permissions have you managing user accounts like a house of cards, it's not just you. For service accounts, background jobs, and any workflow that should just work without a user present, there's a better way hiding in plain sight. The question is, are you ready for the approach that actually supports secure, reliable automation without babysitting logins? Solving the maze, how app-only permissions change the game. So here's what most IT pros wish someone had told them sooner. Big organizations don't gamble critical automations on a user's password or session lasting the night. They use app-only permissions. It's not because they have more resources or buy some super premium Microsoft license. The difference is in how their apps talk to Microsoft Graph, not as Jane from HR or Tim from finance, but as a dedicated application identity. This approach means the app itself is recognized as its own entity in Azure AD. No one needs to log in. No one's credentials go stale. If you need a SharePoint job to run at 3 a.m., it doesn't check if someone's sitting at their desk. It just works. App-only permissions are kind of the secret sauce behind reliable automation. Once you get this concept, things actually get simpler. The app gets a defined set of permissions, say access to just the resources it needs on SharePoint, Teams, or Outlook, nothing more. That's the principle of least privilege in action. Instead of a bot inheriting every permission tied to a specific user and all the risk that comes with it, your app only gets the exact access it needs to do its job. You get more predictability in what it can access, less exposure if something goes sideways, and no headaches chasing down that elusive global admin checkbox just to keep automation running overnight. But here's why the idea is both powerful and, for most, intimidating. Setting up app-only permissions doesn't come with a one-click button labeled "Make this secure and easy." The interface is scattered across Azure AD, the Graph portal, and sometimes even the classic legacy admin pages. Registering an app means navigating menus, picking an authentication method, setting the right callback URLs, and ultimately picking permissions out of a dropdown that's definitely longer than it needs to be. There's nowhere in the process that stops and explains why some permissions are labeled application, others delegated, or what happens if someone grants too much access. Most tutorials gloss over the messy middle. You'll see quick demos of setting up client secrets or certificates, but almost none show the aftermath when the wrong permission is selected or the admin consent process goes sideways. Every admin knows the feeling. You think you've set everything up, but the next step throws you a cryptic error. Maybe insufficient privileges pops up when you test the graph call, or your webhook refuses to fire because consent wasn't properly granted. Figuring out why can turn into a support ticket scavenger hunt. When you finally track it down, it's something like application not authorized by admin, which translates to someone needs to give organizational level consent before this app can act without a user present. Depending on your tenant's security policies, that step might involve layered approvals or even a change management process. Let's play out what happens when you get it right. Your app is now its own service principal. Want to upload documents to SharePoint, even if everyone's offline or accounts are in limbo? No problem. The bot has the permissions and it never gets kicked out for inactivity. Say you're running a nightly archive of conversations from Teams to SharePoint for compliance. People can switch jobs, leave the company, or just forget their password over the holidays. Your automation keeps running as if nothing changed. Think about what that means for scale. Suddenly, you can line up hundreds of process automations or reporting tasks without having to assign a Frankenstein set of permissions to service accounts that confuse both admins and auditors. One real-world example. A large insurance provider built a document processing bot that ingests daily reports, uploads files to SharePoint, and sends alerts if something looks off. No delegated access, no dependency on the user, just app-only permissions mapped to exactly what's in scope. The bot ran for months before its secret expired, and yes, they set a calendar reminder for that. Not one ticket about failed authentication, not one Teams ping at 3 in the morning. It wasn't luck, it was by design. Microsoft, for its part, leans into this hard in their documentation. Their guidance is clear: if you're building background services or automating tasks that aren't tied to a logged-in user, use app-only permissions. Reduced attack surface and easier auditing, that's not just marketing. It makes log analysis and compliance reviews cleaner because you know exactly what the app can and can't do. If something goes wrong, you aren't left wondering which user's session triggered a problem. Every action's tied back to the app's identity, not a person. Of course, app-only permissions don't mean you throw out best practices. You still need to be smart about which specific permissions you select. Less is more. Only check the boxes your automation actually needs. Write access for that one site, maybe, but not full control of all SharePoint sites unless there's no alternative. This narrows any risk if a secret leaks or if someone else tries to elevate permissions for convenience later. It's the opposite of the give it global admin just to get it working shortcut everyone regrets. There's a practical payoff to this shift beyond just fewer support tickets. When you cut out all the dependency on user accounts, your automations become more resilient, not just to session timeouts, but to org changes, onboarding, offboarding, and even licensing surprises. You're free to build workflows and bots that survive employee turnover, role changes, or surprise security updates. So, what does it take to actually set this up without getting lost in permissions hell? Registration, permissions, consent, and securing your secrets. The steps matter, and missing any one of them can land you right back at square one. Next, I'll lay out the specific moves you need to make to set up app-only permissions properly, dodge the common failure points, and actually get the benefits everyone promises but few deliver in their guides. Step-by-step setting up app-only permissions without the gotchas. If you've ever paced through Azure AD's endless panels and still wound up staring down a 403 insufficient privileges message, welcome to the club. The registration process for app-only permissions isn't just unnecessarily complex, it's filled with silent traps. Most getting started blogs make it sound like a 2-minute checklist, but if you've tried doing it in production, you know how easy it is to get all the way through and still miss the one tiny box that makes everything break. What's worse, the UI doesn't always tell you what's missing. One misplaced permission or a skipped consent page, and you'll be troubleshooting for the rest of the afternoon, or worse, pushing changes to production and hoping for the best. Let's talk about those gotchas that no one highlights until you're neck deep in failed runs. Step 1 is registering your app in the Azure portal. You click New Registration, give your app a sensible name or something you'll immediately regret in a week, and move to the redirect URIs. Most background services don't need these, so you skip over it, but sometimes skipping it means your app throws errors down the road with no clear link to what went wrong. The core catch is in the permissions setup. The default is to assign delegated permissions since that's what most user-facing apps need. But for background processes, you absolutely need to switch to application permissions. The difference isn't just academic. Delegated permissions assume a user is involved, while application permissions let the app itself act as a first-class citizen. The list of permissions is massive and easy to get lost in. Maybe your automation just needs access to upload to a specific SharePoint document library, but if you choose sites read all instead of sites full control all, you'll see cryptic errors about missing privileges, even though in the portal it looks fine. The trick is to map exactly what your workflow needs, nothing more. Over-provisioning seems tempting when you hit a weird error, but it just increases your risk later, making audits a nightmare. At this step, take a breath and actually read what each permission grants, because you'll need to justify that list to security, if not right away, then at your next annual review. Now comes the true test. Admin consent. Even if you pick the right permissions, the permissions don't mean anything until an admin grants consent. Depending on your tenant's policies, this can range from a one-click accept to a week-long approval process. Some organizations have layered consent controls, so your request bounces around, and meanwhile the UI tells you everything is ready. Spoiler, it's not. The symptom everyone hits here is running your app and seeing insufficient privileges. Not because you didn't add the permission, but because the admin didn't finalize consent on the back end. Double-checking consent in enterprise apps, permissions, is always worth the time, even if the dashboard claims you're all set. Let's not gloss over securing your credentials. After you register the app, You generate a client secret. Here's where a lot of folks cut corners, storing the secret in plain text with the code or tossing it somewhere on a shared drive. That secret is your app's identity card for Microsoft Graph, and exposing it even briefly is an open door for attackers. Always store secrets in a secure vault, Azure Key Vault if possible, and set a reasonable expiration date. Long-lived secrets sound convenient until the day you forget to rotate one and your automation grinds to a halt after 9 months because of an expired credential. Rotate proactively, log reminders, and make least privilege the default mindset for both secrets and permissions. There's another less advertised wrinkle with error handling. App-only permissions surface errors differently than delegated ones. For example, if you're testing a file upload bot for SharePoint, missing access means you'll get back a dry insufficient privileges from the Graph API, no hand-holding from the UI, no missing user context. You need to be ready to parse that error detail and know exactly which permission it maps to. The only way to debug cleanly is by running consent and access checks for each scope in your pipeline. Take that file upload bot as a real-world example. You'd start by registering your app, picking application permissions for SharePoint, and requesting sites read, write, font all, only if absolutely necessary. Once admin consent is granted, you generate a client secret, lock it down, and plug it into your automation's configuration. For the first run, you'll probably see a cryptic error, maybe a guide or a resource not found. Almost always, it's a mismatch between the library your app is calling and the permission assigned. The learning curve here is real, but once you work through the exact SharePoint site ID, URL mapping, and permission scope, suddenly your bot uploads files at 2 a.m., no user needed. The logs fill with clean success messages, not error dumps. The key takeaway: every detail in the process matters. Register the app, pick only application permissions, secure and regularly rotate your secrets, and confirm admin consent actually went through. Get this chain right, and your automation becomes both safer and almost completely self-sufficient. Your support tickets drop, security has fewer questions, and you have more confidence handing off support duties to the next team member. A win all around. Now that you've finally got app-only permissions lined up and running strong, the natural next step is pushing those limits, real-time notifications, bi-directional updates, and integrating with more live Microsoft 365 features. That's where webhooks and modern toolkits can really expand your automation landscape if you know the quirks ahead of time. Automation in action, real-world benefits, and live notifications. Imagine running an app that quietly keeps the wheels turning while everyone else is offline. SharePoint uploads land in the right document libraries at 2 in the morning. Teams alerts fire off when a new file arrives, and dashboards keep themselves up to date with zero manual interference. Nobody has to check in, log on, or wonder if their account might throw a wrench in the process. That's the everyday reality once you've moved your automation to app-only permissions. It changes what's possible, not just because things stop breaking when people leave for vacation, but because you can finally trust that your background processes will outlive any single user's session. It's one thing to see basic jobs run overnight, but the reliability goes further. Take a case where the business needs file syncs across different SharePoint sites, Teams updates for new records, and a management dashboard that pulls numbers every few hours. Before app-only permissions, there'd be a real risk that some component of the chain would go dead thanks to a missed login. After the move, that chain hums along, regardless of who's out sick or whose password gets updated. You start to see those midnight Teams pings get replaced by real actionable notifications, waking people up for reasons that actually matter. Yet reliability is only half the story. Let's talk about scale and real-time events. With app-only permissions, you don't just turn on background jobs. You start plugging into events as they happen, even with no user online. Webhooks in Microsoft Graph become an option for actual production work, not just developer experiments. Set up a webhook and your app can subscribe to changes on a SharePoint site or new messages in a Teams channel, getting a prompt nudge every time an event lands. There's no dependency on user presence, which means you don't miss a thing when staff close their laptops or go on holiday. Setting up webhooks, though, isn't as set it and forget it as the rest of the app-only model. Microsoft Graph expects tighter controls when there isn't a user session. Every webhook subscription has to be created and renewed by your app itself using its identity, not a random service account. During setup, you need to prove your endpoint is legit, which means handling the validation token Microsoft sends in the very first request. Miss that and your notifications never start. Endpoint security also gets ramped up. Microsoft enforces stricter requirements on HTTPS and expects your receiver to be able to process high throughput bursts and retries without exposing confidential details in responses. The Graph toolkit can smooth out a lot of the Graph API's rough edges, but there's a caveat. Out of the box, many of the components assume delegated sign-in for interactive user sessions. To take advantage of app-only permissions, you need to deliberately configure components in your own context, often calling Graph endpoints directly from your backend, or customizing the provider logic to hand over the app-only token. It's a step extra, but it's what lets you drop those dependencies on users entirely. Care here means you're not trading one set of headaches for another. Error scopes become clearer, failures are logged with the correct identity, and callbacks don't suddenly switch context just because someone logs in or out in the browser tab. Best practice at this point is less about wizard-style setup and more about discipline. With app-only permissions, failures don't bubble up politely. The API just returns a status code with your operation. That means logging every failure, especially transient ones, is your first line of defense. If your automation retries after a temporary network issue, it should do so with exponential backoff and without dumping secrets or tokens in a log file. Whenever a process fails, make sure you record enough context: what operation, what resource, and which permission may have been in play. Don't fall into the habit of retrying endlessly. Rate limits hit hard with app-only calls, and a single runaway process can end up locked out for hours if it's careless. Here's a real scenario that brings it all together. A Power Platform app combines SharePoint file sync, Teams messaging, and automatic dashboard refreshes. Everything runs headless. The data flow starts with a webhook that lets the app know when a new document lands in SharePoint. That triggers an app-only call to grab the file, process it, and push metadata to a Teams channel for review. It wraps up by updating a summary value in a company-wide Power BI dashboard. No users were involved in any step. If someone tries to deprovision the app or if permissions change, everything is logged. In fact, those events can trigger their own notifications. That's a feedback loop most companies have dreamed about but rarely achieve with delegated permissions. Moving to this model changes your support tickets too. Fewer late-night calls about expired passwords, fewer user not found errors. Audit trails make more sense since every background job shows up as the app's identity, not some catch-all account. If security wants to know what happened last Tuesday at 4 a.m., you have logs tying each event to a specific machine operation, not a mystery human. The organizational picture shifts when automation just works. Think less time spent debugging and more confidence when spinning up new integrations, branching into new departments, or even expanding across tenants. Suddenly, the scary parts of automation, like live notifications and hands-off processing, become the foundation you rely on for everything else. That opens the door to even bigger changes for how your business handles information and keeps people connected, no matter how many apps you build or how fast your environment evolves. If you've slogged through background job failures and endless permission errors, you know why app-only permissions matter. They're not just a patch, they create a real foundation for automation that actually survives org changes, policy updates, and day-to-day churn. Instead of patching user accounts or adding risky shortcuts, you set your automations up for the long haul. If your goal is for custom apps to be more resilient while reducing support overhead, now is the time to get intentional about your permissions model. Want to keep building smarter? Subscribe and let me know the one Microsoft 365 automation pain point you keep wrestling with.